Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is the pre-application information session for the fiscal year 2021 Underserved program. I am Kara Mahler, and I am the OVW program specialist who manages the outreach and services for Underserved Populations Program, or Underserved program for short. The purpose of this session is to provide information regarding the Underserved solicitation. We will highlight a few key sections in this solicitation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect today. The solicitation document contains detailed information about eligibility, application requirements, and instructions on how to apply. Applicants are responsible for reading the fiscal year 2021 Underserved solicitation in its entirety and ensuring that a complete application is submitted. Today's webinar is about an open solicitation. Therefore, in order to maintain fair and open competition, I cannot provide any feedback to applicants about the quality of a proposal or guidance on project design. However, I am available to answer questions about anything in the solicitation or let you know whether something is allowed. We will end with a question and answer portion. If you still have questions after this session, please send them to the Underserved mailbox at ovw.underserved@usdoj.gov. It will be helpful for you to have this solicitation in front of you for a point of reference during this information session. Today, I am joined by Christina Damiani from ALSO, which is an acronym for the Alliance of Local Service Organizations.
Hi, as Kara said, my name is Christina, and I am the Director of Safe Homes at ALSO. For those not familiar with ALSO, ALSO is a Chicago-based anti-violence nonprofit organization with over 2 decades of peace-building experience. We serve and partner with individuals, groups, and agencies in Chicago and around the country to help prevent and intervene in violence through direct services, training, consultation, and policy advocacy. It is within this scope that also is the training and technical assistance provider for the OVW Underserved program. While Kara is the OVW grant manager that oversees this program and monitoring of grantees, we at ALSO are responsible for the training and technical assistance needs for underserved grantees. ALSO is an OVW grantee as well, with our project scope to serve as a resource for grantees around the content and programmatic needs of their projects. If funded, we will go over these distinctions between our role and OVW's role during orientation and your time as funded grantees.
First, Christine and I will talk about the Underserved program. We will go over the purpose of this grant program and what you can and cannot do. The Underserved program is one of OVW's newest grant programs. It was authorized in the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act, or VAWA, of 2013, and only began making competitive grants in 2016.
The purpose of all grants made by the Underserved program is to develop and implement outreach strategies targeted at victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking in underserved populations, and to provide victim services to meet the needs of those victims. This includes these 5 purpose areas or strategies to meet that goal. Working with governments, agencies, and organizations to develop or enhance population-specific services, strengthening the capacity of underserved populations and traditional victim service providers to provide population-specific victim services, areas 2 and 3. Under area number 4, grant funds can be used to enhance the criminal and civil justice system's response by training them about the needs and specific issues faced by victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking from underserved populations. And finally, the 5th one is working in cooperation with an underserved population to develop and implement outreach, education, prevention, and intervention about specific issues faced by victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking from underserved populations.
These are the things that you can do under this grant program. Please review the purpose areas carefully, as project activities funded through the Underserved Grant Program must fall under one or more of these purpose areas. But again, remember, these areas are the types of activities that can be done as connected to the overall purpose of providing or enhancing population-specific outreach and victim services for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking in the targeted underserved community. In fiscal year 2021, the Underserved program encourages applicants to consider the OVW office-wide priority area around victim services. Organizations are encouraged to develop their capacity beyond just core services and basic programming and emergency response. For example, victim services that go beyond crisis intervention to advance the long-term safety, stability, and self-sufficiency of victims, such as education assistance, vocational training, employment services, financial counseling, etc. But please note, this priority area is optional. Applicants are encouraged to consider this when they're developing their projects. However, no additional points will be given if they do. For what you can't do with funds, first we'll start with victim safety. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Applications that propose any such activities may receive a deduction in points during the review process, or may be eliminated from consideration altogether. Information on these activities can be found in the Solicitation Companion Guide. This is linked or referred to in the solicitation and is on the OVW website. Page 7 in the solicitation lists activities that are out of scope for the Underserved program. This Underserved grant program does not fund research projects, which does not include assessments conducted for only internal improvement purposes, which can only be up to 1% of the award. For information on distinguishing between research and assessments, see the heading on this topic in the funding restrictions section of the solicitation and companion guide. By statute, this program only addresses ages 11 and older. Activities and services for children under the age of 11 are out of scope. The only exception for this is when providing ancillary services to a victim's child because there's a need and connection in providing victim services for the parent, such as children of victims residing in a shelter with their abused parent. Except in the limited context of protection order proceedings or for limited immigration matters affecting the victim's ability to maintain safety, legal services are out of scope. Grant funds cannot be used to provide legal representation in civil or criminal matters such as family law cases, divorce, custody, visitation and child support, housing cases, consumer law cases, etc. Sexual assault medical forensic examiner programs are out of scope. Grant funds can only be used to support services related to the population's experience of the 4 crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Any training, outreach, education, prevention, and public awareness must be directly linked to providing or enhancing population-specific services for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking from the targeted underserved population. Nationally or regionally focused projects are also out of scope. Service areas should correspond to the communities accessing victim services provided by the organizations involved. This is not a training and technical assistance program. Hosting or presenting at national or regional conferences is also out of scope. If presenting locally relates to the targeted service area, that could be allowable, but only if it is something that directly benefits the project's targeted community and the goals objective of the approved project. Including any of these areas will result in significant point deductions or removal of your application from consideration altogether. And if funded, these are prohibited activities. The grant award period will be for 36 months. Please note, this is a change from prior years where we used to make 2-year grants. So please make sure that your project and budgets reflect a full 36 months of activity. Generally, project periods will start on October 1st, in this case, 2021, and grants are going to be made for up to $450,000, and that's for the entire 3-year period. That is not per year. We are accepting both new and continuation applications. However, grant recipients that were funded in 2019 or 2020 are not eligible to apply. Additionally, current grantees with a substantial amount of unobligated funds remaining, 50% or more of the previous award, without adequate justification may not be considered for funding or may receive a reduced amount if selected for an award. The types of applicants eligible to apply are detailed on pages 10 to 11 of the solicitation. In fiscal year 2021, the only eligible applicants are the following. Deaf programs, meaning a program that is run by and for deaf individuals. The program may be a standalone deaf domestic violence or sexual violence victim service provider, a general deaf services nonprofit non-governmental organization, or a deaf domestic violence and or sexual violence program administratively housed in a hearing victim service provider. LGBT organizations, meaning an organization for which the primary purpose of the organization as a whole is to serve LGBT individuals. Religious minority organizations, meaning an organization for which the primary purpose of the organization as a whole is to serve members of a religious minority who face barriers accessing and using victim services. And the last category is disability programs. In this case, meaning a victim service provider or organization serving individuals with disabilities that has received 2 continuation awards under the OVW Disability Grant Program. For the disability program applicant type, either the nonprofit victim service provider or the nonprofit disability service provider in the Disability Grant Collaborative can now be the lead to apply for this program. Former disability grantees can also tweak their collaboration, but also must meet the requirements and show the continued deep partnership between the mainstream victim service provider and the disability program, especially if the Mr. Mainstream organization will be the lead applicant. Simply stating an organization is one of these 4 types will not suffice. Information must be provided in the application to demonstrate this. And all applicants must be a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization that are one of these 4 types. There is no other type of organization that is eligible for this program. Former grantees should note that culturally specific organizations are no longer eligible to apply. This slide summarizes the Underserved program, and I want to keep it up as a backdrop as Christina discusses examples of the types of organizations and projects we fund. This outlines the context of the 4 types of population-specific organizations that we fund, the purpose of the grants we make, and the types of activities those projects can do.
Some examples that I hope will illustrate the type of projects that the OVW Underserved program funds include a deaf program who is also a victim service provider partners with multiple agencies that provide services their deaf survivors may need, such as agencies that provide housing and employment. This deaf victim service provider will work with these partner agencies to improve their knowledge and capacity on serving deaf survivors and to make these agencies' current services more trauma-informed and deaf-friendly and appropriate. Grant funds will also support 2 part-time deaf advocates who will provide direct services to survivors. Another example is a community-based organization with the primary purpose to serve the Muslim community, is a multi-service agency and has clients who they know are victims of sexual assault, but this is not their expertise and they do not provide victim services. They partner with a rape crisis center who will train the Muslim organization staff on working with sexual assault survivors, help them develop some core services, and provide supervision and assist with cases, etc. Grant funds will pay to translate the Rape Crisis Center's brochure into Arabic and other languages and those will include both agencies' information. Another example is an LGBT youth center partners with a sexual assault program. Grant funds will support the sexual assault center training the LGBT center staff, their time helping the LGBT grantee develop the structure and content for support groups, and for the first year, sexual assault center staff will co-lead the support groups with the LGBT center staff. Conversely, the LGBT center staff conducted quarterly training of the sexual assault center staff about working with LGBT youth. The two organizations will meet monthly during the lifetime of the grant. Other activities include helping the sexual assault centers update materials and their office to show they are LGBT friendly, developing pamphlets on LGBT sexual assault, and staff from both agencies meeting with sexual assault victims together. Another example is a rape crisis center and an independent living facility developed and delivered training to transit and city police officers about responding to survivors with disabilities. The independent living facility will use grant funds for a part-time staff person to coordinate with a resident discloses a sexual assault to ensure the rape crisis center understands the needs of that survivor with disabilities. Cross trainings on sexual assault and working with people with disabilities will take place every 6 months. Another example is an Orthodox Jewish social service agency partner with a domestic violence agency, and together they will develop and then co-train all local law enforcement about what it means for Orthodox Jewish families to experience domestic violence and things to know, such as how they react to police coming to their door. When the Orthodox Jewish agency identifies a survivor of domestic violence, they will coordinate with the domestic violence program to provide their direct services. Collaborative meetings will take place quarterly, and staff at the Jewish organization will advise the DV agency to understand cultural competency around these clients. And finally, an LGBT health clinic partnered with their local rape crisis center to jointly develop a sexual assault response team specific to the city's LGBT community. The two organizations meet monthly. They also work together to co-train other social service organizations, hospitals, and government responders about LGBT sexual assault survivors. They will create materials about LGBT sexual assault and co-train youth organizations serving the LGBT community.
Next, we'll discuss the specifics of the application. Every application must include at least one formal project partner. If the applicant has at least 3 years of demonstrated experience and expertise in providing population-specific victim services, they must partner with one other organization, but it could be of any type of their choice. If the application is from an organization that has less than 3 years of demonstrated experience and expertise in providing population-specific victim services, they must include and work in partnership with a victim service provider. The last category is a disability program. They must include a multidisciplinary partnership comprised of, at a minimum, the following: at least one victim service provider and at least one nonprofit, non-governmental organization or tribal organization serving individuals with disabilities and/or deaf individuals. Applications should always include the organizations necessary to meet the goals of the proposed project and those needed to implement the proposed activities. One partner is a minimum requirement. More than one partner is allowed. Partners must be organizations and not individuals. These partnerships must be formally demonstrated through the project memorandum of understanding, which I'll talk about later. There are two key definitions to these that relate to these requirements. Population-specific services are victim-centered services that address the needs of victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and that are designed primarily for and targeted to a specific underserved population. A victim service provider has a very specific definition for this funding. If your application requires a victim service provider partner, the application itself must demonstrate how the partner organization meets this definition. Simply stating this will not suffice. Please note, victim service providers must provide direct services as a primary purpose. These are domestic and/or sexual violence specific services. Please review the definitions of eligible applicant types and partnerships requirements in the solicitation carefully. The application must clearly demonstrate how all eligibility requirements are being met. This includes how the applicant is an eligible applicant type and how the partnership requirements have been met. If the applicant is not a victim service provider and coming in as a population-specific organization, they must demonstrate how they meet that definition. If they are asserting that they are providing population-specific victim services, they must explain how and what those services are and who they serve. If a victim service provider is required, or the applicant is coming in as a victim service provider, again, the application must demonstrate how the organization is both a victim service provider and meets this definition. Also, applicants should consider the focus of the proposed project and the appropriate type of victim service provider. For example, if the application is proposing to serve or address sexual assault, it should include an organization that has experience and expertise in sexual assault. If the application is proposing to address domestic violence, the same than a domestic violence service provider. Again, simply stating an organization is a type of these organizations or a victim service provider does not suffice. The required partnerships, again, must be formally demonstrated through the project MOU. Applicants must follow all formatting requirements or points may be deducted. Additionally, as stated in the solicitation, the project narrative must be no more than 20 pages. Reviewers will not read anything after page 20 for the project narrative. Reviewers will also not read any additional attachments beyond those required. The solicitation lays out what the application must include. Applications need to be responsive to these instructions. For this program, OVW has designated the project narrative, budget, and MOU as critical. What this means is that if you are missing any one of these three elements, your application will be deemed unresponsive to the solicitation and will not proceed forward to peer review. The solicitation describes the elements that should be addressed in each of these documents and sections. Every bullet must be addressed in each section. The application overall must make clear what will take place and who will implement things and why the cost budgeted makes sense to that. The project narrative is comprised of 3 sections: the purpose, what will be done, and who will implement. What will be done section is crucial and as such has the most points assigned to it. This is where we know exactly what the grant project will do. This section should be detailed and responsive to make clear what grant funds will be used for, and this really is the crux of your application. As a reminder, everyone must submit a signed memorandum of understanding that mirrors the rest of the application in response to the solicitation. This is one document signed and dated by the authorized representatives of the applicant and project partners. Multiple MOUs will not be accepted. Old MOUs, internal working MOUs, the organizations may have already, and documents unrelated to the solicitation will also not be accepted. The information as laid out in the solicitation is exactly what our peer reviewers will use when reviewing your application to assess and score it. Reviewers will assess, did the application address all the elements? Is the application as a whole sound and consistent? Does the application as a whole flow together? For example, why would a project that describes inclusive and relevant sexual assault services for the population as the need and purpose then include domestic violence advocates or domestic violence awareness costs? Why would an application that asserts they will provide domestic violence services budget for a community educator from an organization with no experience in domestic violence as the only funded staff? There are also additional documents and attachments that will be included or must be included with your application. These are listed in the solicitation. The last page of the solicitation document includes a checklist of all these items. Please refer to that checklist. The next couple of slides that we're going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team, the Grants Financial Management Division, GFMD, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year applications that could help with expediting this review. So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. The first few things we'll highlight are the items identified in the data requested with application, which is completed by all applicants. Specifically, 3 items we would like to discuss are the nonprofit organization requirement, the single audit response, and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. If you're an eligible private nonprofit to receive outreach and services to underserved population program funding, you are required to submit a determination letter from the Internal Revenue Service recognizing your tax-exempt status. OVW cannot make an award to any nonprofit organization that does not submit a 501c3 determination letter. Applicants not including this part as their application further delays the review by GFMD. Please ensure that this document is included if applicable. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they need to indicate that and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. However, GFMD is finding that applicants have not always included this information and leave out whether or not they've included, whether they have met the threshold or the end date of their last fiscal year is not included. Please ensure that you answer this question in its entirety on the data requested with application sheet. Another item I'd like to highlight from this solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations, which is if you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive compensation, you must reference the additional information section that provides the required disclosure letter. There are 4 parts of this disclosure letter that must be provided to OVW in order to comply with this requirement. The sample letter provided outlines all 4 parts in this disclosure, so please be sure to follow the sample and provide a response to each of the 4 pieces. The next item I'll discuss are the financial accounting practices, which assist our GFMD staff during the pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and each question has multiple parts. We've noticed from prior years that applicants did not always fully answer all parts of these questions, which in turn requires our staff to reach out to the applicant and delays recommendations for funding. Some of the most common issues we've encountered have been, for example, in question number 2, where the applicant indicates they do indeed have internal policies, but then they don't actually provide a brief list of topics covered in the policies and procedures. Another example of incomplete responses include on question number 3, where the applicant does not provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. These are just a few examples, but basically please make sure you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. This next slide quickly highlights some resources that are available that could be used as you're creating the budget to be submitted with the application. Over the last year, GFMD has worked to develop a detailed webinar presentation on how to assist applicants in developing the budget that will be submitted with their OVW applications. They want to help reduce any challenges you may face with the budget and make it clear what they look for when they review your budget. This webinar provides some insight as to what OVW financial staff considered during that review. Please use the following link that's provided on this presentation. The webinar can be found under the budget information section of this page of this solicitation as well. Lastly, the uniform guidance which can be found at 2 CFR 200. And another resource is the DOJ Financial Guide, as well as the program-specific solicitation, in this case, Underserved. If you need assistance finding these resources, please contact the GFMD Help Desk or myself. We know this is a lot of information to process, so if you have any questions about the GFMD information that was just discussed, please feel free to contact the GFMD Help Desk at the phone number and email provided here. The fiscal year 2021 application submission process is a very new two-step process this year with significant differences from the application process in the past. Application materials will be submitted in grants.gov and Just Grants. We recommend starting the application process even with just grants.gov and the Just Grants registration process as soon as possible to allow for learning this new system. Carefully review the How to Apply and Submission Dates and Times sections on pages 27 to 31 of the solicitation to understand all the steps required to submit an application and the deadlines for each of these steps. Some steps, such as obtaining a DUNS number or registering with the System for Award Management or SAM or grants.gov, may take several days to complete. We recommend applicants begin these processes as soon as possible, but no later than the date suggested in the solicitation. Applications for this program are due by April 1st, 2021. Applications submitted after 11:59 p.m. on April 1st will not be considered for funding. It is the applicant's responsibility to ensure that all steps are followed as outlined in the solicitation and to maintain all documentation along the way. Applicants that do experience technical issues with Just Grants should contact the OVW Just Grants support line as soon as possible. Also, OVW will take the necessary steps to ensure that applicants are able to submit their applications on time. Applicants experience Just Grants technical issues should ensure that they are developing their proposals while they are working to address these technical issues. Applicants should follow the solicitation guidance regarding technical difficulties. This will enable them to submit a full proposal by the deadline using an alternative method if necessary. Pages 27 to 30 overall outline the process and steps for applying. For those experiencing technical difficulties, additional steps are outlined on pages 30 to 31. The specific actions that must be adhered to for late submission requests are more important this year than ever. This includes following all steps for applying and meeting all deadlines for each process, keeping all communication and documentation of these steps, including ticket numbers and correspondence with help desks, contacting OVW by email by the required deadlines if experiencing problems, and submitting all required information and documentation to OVW with each step. We will update our submission guidance as necessary and as the due date nears. I will now go over a list of very common errors, and these are the areas where applicants have proved to be unsuccessful in the past. Number one is an application is not from an eligible applicant type. Submitting substantially incomplete applications. Missing required partnerships, not meeting their partnership requirements. Including an unsigned memorandum of understanding. The applicant not providing all the required information, or cutting and pasting from prior years applications responding to prior year solicitations, or providing the wrong information and missing the current requirements for this year. Providing information in the wrong section. Failing to adequately demonstrate experience or expertise of both the applicant and or partner. Or an application that's not specific to and about the needs of survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking, for the purposes of his Underserved grant program. If you have any questions, here is a contact information on who to contact. And please know that after this session ends, I will email you both this presentation and the script with all the lists of help desks as well. We are now finished with presentation portion and we'll open up for questions and answers.